So in this tutorial, we're going to be making some cool particle looking stuff with the new particles that came out earlier this year and got a bit of a buff recently with Cinema 4D 2025. This is going to be more of a basic tutorial, more on the beginner's side, and a lot of that is due to the fact that these particles are still largely in their adolescence. There's a lot we can't do with the particles yet, but there is a lot we can do with them and get some really interesting results. I ended up using these particles in a project for Microsoft earlier in the year, and that's where I really got familiar with them, and ever since then I've been dying to make a tutorial and come and show you what I learned, because I was just so deep in them during that time that I ended up getting my head around them quite well. And it was very similar stuff to what you're looking at now and what you saw at the beginning of the tutorial that we're going to be making. So we're going to dive into that. Like I said, it's going to be quite simple, and I think this is also great that Cinema has this now, because in my experience from people that I've coached and people that I've helped over the years, diving into simulations, particles especially, is very scary for the average user that's not really went near it before. So the fact that this is integrated and we can get very stunning results very quickly without really having to do too much. We're using familiar forces. There's a large sense of familiarity to it. So without much more rambling, we're going to dive into this. I'm going to show you a couple of setups. We're going to keep it on Redshift today. I'm going to do a couple more of these particle tutorials, so maybe I'll show you some Octane stuff with it as well, but we're just going to keep it in Redshift to keep it simple. So to begin with, let's drop in a basic emitter. So we've got our basic emitter. When we drop this in, it's going to drop in a particle group. I'm not really going to go into that too much in today's tutorial, but I think I want to make a couple more advanced things with this. We're going to keep things really simple today. We're going to change this to a circle. We can keep it the same size, and we're not actually going to shoot any particles today. Yeah, no, this is kind of like a shockwave, but it's not really a shockwave. It's going to look like a shockwave. It's not going to behave like one. Come up, we'll do 10,000 for now. We'll jump this up to about 180. Play through this. It's not going to look the way we want it to. I have found this not super buggy, but sometimes it can be a little bit slow, but then at other times it can be incredibly fast, so we just have to go with it. And the particles coming out of the edges, so we're going to go to properties, and the velocity, the direction, we'll change this to radial, and that will get the particles coming out of the edges. Now the first thing we're going to do, again, you know, like I said before, this is such a good entry point to X particles to learn just the mechanics, because all of it really is the same language when you're learning this stuff. So to learn little things, little tricks from the book of particles, to look dev them, make them look good, art direct them, all these things. One common rule when we're doing particles like this, assuming we aren't making some sort of render that's going to have, you know, an object in front of them. I mean, even if we did have the object in front of them, we're still going to do what I'm going to teach you to do. But one little common rule is you don't really ever want to see particles spawning. You do not want to see where they're coming from or where they're spawning. You want that to just kind of be fluid. That's going to add a lot more fluidity to whatever particle simulation you're doing, is not seeing where they come from. So what we're going to do is take this thing called a data mapper. Seems quite scary, but what I'm going to do to simplify it for you is we're going to call it radius by age. So what we're basically going to use this data mapper to do is scale in the particles based on their age. So as they start here, we're going to have them scale in and then scale out. If you're familiar with particles at all, you would have done this before. And I actually like the approach of the data mapper for this in the new particle system, because they seem to be going for kind of a way where they're condensing what a lot of other particle systems would have very spread out with tons of different modifiers. They're condensing it into a couple of modifiers, which is really useful. So we're going to take the age by the radius, and let's say 90 frames. If we play through this, what we're actually going to have to do, so let me stop myself. What we're going to have to do first is go to the particle group. Sorry, I know I've got a bad habit of going really fast. I've not made a tutorial in a couple of months, so I'm getting my rhythm back. We're going to go to the particle group. We're going to go to draw. We're going to hit draw radius. I'm going to change this to 0.001. I'm going to turn off that data mapper quickly. Play through this. Deselect the particle group, otherwise it'll show you the original size. And we turn this back on now. And then we come to the properties of the emitter, go to radius, change it to 0. Play through that. Now we're seeing the particles scale in and scale out. I don't quite know why you have to change the radius here. It doesn't really override it like it should. But if you don't do that, you get this weird bugging out inside the emitter. And when you cache the particles as well, it gets rid of this in the viewport, the ability to see this. When you cache your particles, it's going to, well, I have to change this back to 1, but it's going to look like this again after you cache, which is a little bit weird, but in Redshift, And in your render, it would still look like this. It's a little bit strange, but just something to look out for. So with that, what we're going to do next is we're going to add a turbulence, something we're all very familiar with. And this is what's cool. All these original forces work with these particles. So we're going to add a turbulence. Now what we're actually going to do is, this is what really amazed me about these particles when I first used them, is they respond really, really well to the forces you apply to them. So they seem to pull a lot of detail out of the forces. I'm trying to explain that the best I can, but it's like the turbulences just have more energy about them, more detail. It's like, just looks cool. And I checked when I was first messing with this, I was like, I've never got a result this quickly out of X particles. So I went back to X particles and I messed with it all and did all the same stuff. And I managed to get a similar result, pretty similar, but of course the forces were kind of flipped, different strength levels and stuff, and you have to look out for that when you're switching between things. But it was definitely easier to get the result here. And I think that says a lot about where this could go in the future. Little things, we can't really collide particles off of each other yet, which is really restrictive because the gravity actually works with them. So if we could collide particles off of each other, maybe there is a way, I don't know. I haven't found it, if there is. I guess flocking does maybe slightly. And we'll go into flocking a bit later because it can add some sort of fake fluid parameters. I'll go into it in a couple minutes actually. But as soon as we can collide these particles off of each other, it's going to be a game changer. Anyway, we've got turbulence. Not much going on. What we're going to do, we're going to set the scale to about, let's do 5%. Let's keep the strength at 5. So what you're going to see here is we're getting these cool kind of lines, right? What we're basically going to do is layer the turbulences. So we're going to actually set that scale to about 8%. We're going to drop in a second turbulence. We'll set the scale to about 13%. Keep it very small. You can see here, we're getting even more detail now. But I'm going to up the particle count. So let's come up to 100,000. We're going to see more of that detail. And I'm actually going to see if I can get that smaller. So I'm going to add in an extra 0 here. No, that's as small as it can go. So I swear they're usually a bit smaller than that. Maybe it's to do with this. Change it to 0.5. Change it to 0.1. And again, scale of this doesn't really matter. Particles can't collide off each other, so we can control all the scale in render and Redshift. Scale is, that's better. The scale is a little bit more important with particles when we're dealing with particles dealing with each other, right? So the particles don't know the other particles really exist right now. And that means that what we're doing with the scale here, it doesn't really matter because as soon as we put a redshift tag on it and put the objects, we can do what we want with the scale. So right now, we just want it looking cool, right? So we've got two turbulences. Let's maybe bring the scale, let's make this one 8%, the first one about 4%. And we're going to see here like really thin, nice lines. And that's really similar to the first image I showed you. You can see if I go through a lot of these, and we'll go into these ones a little bit too, but I was really going for these nice streaks. That one's a little bit crazier. And really this is with the new stuff that was added in 2025. They've got like a spline follow tool, which allows it to follow the spline, which is really powerful. But really all of these it's a really simple setup. We'll go for about 4 turbulences. We'll add another one, make this about 15%, maybe drop the strength a little bit. And now this is going to add more kind of a waviness to it. So if we turn off the first 2, you can see now this is just kind of, maybe bring up to 5. This is just kind of giving it a bit of flare, right? And then you add in the other 2, and you're getting those streaks with the flare. I don't know if that's maybe a little bit too much. Maybe do around 13%. We can add a 4th one. What we're going to do with that one is actually make it a lot higher. If we watch that one on its own, for example, if we brought the strength up here, you can see how crazy that would be going. We don't want that because it completely discombobulates the direction of the particles. I mean, we could compensate for that with more speed. But at that point, you're kind of running circles in yourself. So the reason these forces are behaving at the values they're behaving at right now is because of the speed of the particles. Should we increase the speed of the particles, these are going to have to change to compensate to get the same effect. And that's the way particles tend to work, right? So let's go for a slightly bigger scale, really small strength. Again. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what I was doing. Except I wasn't using 100,000 particles. I was using about 1 million to 2 million. You do that there, and you get pretty much what I had. And just with that, with 4 turbulences and a little scale modifier, we've got something really cool. We're going to do some spins on this now. We're going to see how we can tweak it, and then we'll go into Redshift, and we'll see what we can do from there as well. What we're going to do now is I'm just going to show you some little things we can do to spice it up, add to it, and art direct this into different directions and mess with it in a whole bunch of different ways. But this is really just the part of the setup. I mean, when I was doing the Microsoft job, this is really what I was working with. So we'll move from here. So the next thing I just want to stop at least before we go into Redshift and stuff, is adding color. So similar to the data mapper, we have a color mapper. And we can just take this and do some interesting things with the color of the particles. So off the bat, this is going to be mapped to the age, which is cool because as the particles get older, they're going to shift through these colors, which is fun. But it can look a little bit basic. And again, I always feel like the way to make particles feel really special, and would have to, you know, I know it's kind of strange names here, lower and upper. This is really just, you know, the beginning of its life to the end of its life. Our particles are scaling out after 90 frames, so we would want that around the same to get the smoothest result. And I don't know why that's looking a little bit jittery. It's looking better now. It is looking a bit jittery. I don't know what's going on there. If we do Control D, go to Simulation, Particles, we've got Substebs here. These will become a little bit more important later on. But with the amount of particles I'm using, right, could be, yep, so that seems to have gotten rid of it. I will drop them down a little bit. Let's go to like 700,000. Just for now. But anyway, back to what I was saying before I got sidetracked. Like I said earlier, you never want to see where a particle spawns, and although mapping a color by age is great, I feel like what really makes particles special is where you look at it and you're just like, what is going on there? I cannot make it out. And you can find that kind of effect a little bit more in something like the velocity. So I believe it's the velocity. If it's not, I'll find what it was. We change this to magnitude, right? And we bring this up. You see now, the colors are spread through in, I don't want to say like a way that's like noise, but you really can't pinpoint it as much. And if you just sort of play with these values, tighten them up, you can get them more contrasty. Again, it's got more of that elusiveness to it now, where it's just like, wow, okay, right, cool. Lots of colors in there. It's not so bricked off with just one color going to the next. There's plenty of times where mapping it by age looks incredible, but I feel like for this, like I said, it's got more of that elusiveness to it. So I've got something pretty cool right now. Turn off that first turbulence, keeps things a little bit, or sorry, that fourth turbulence, keeps things a little bit more neat. Maybe bring down the scale a bit, bring down the frequency a bit. Then turn it back on. Cool. Let's save this. Let's dive into making this more complicated, what we can do to twist with it. Maybe now we've saved that, save a second version of the scene, because really where this is at right now is good enough to make a cool render from. Let's group the turbulences. Call them turbulences because there's a lot of them, right? It's just good to have them tucked in there. Call this color. Emitter just can stay the same. In terms of what we can do to mess with this a little bit more, there is another thing here called flock. Xparticles has this, but it's really slow in Xparticles. It's quite slow here too. But this is what I mentioned earlier with having some sort of like fake fluid parameters, and this can give us stuff that looks a bit like fluids. I'm just going to drop the amount of particles, make sure it still looks good. Yeah, cool. So you can see right now, just off the bat, that flock is muddling everything. Turn off the separation completely, because the separation strength and the radius, what this is going to do, the separation radius, is going to look for a particle close. A particle will look for its nearest particle, and based on the radius, so if you set that to 2, it's going to look 2 centimeters around itself, and if it sees another one based off of this strength, it's going to push it away from itself. So it's going to push any particle it sees within 2 centimeters, every particle will do this, within 2 centimeters of itself, it's going to push the other particles away. So the reason this is all modeled right now is because every single particle is looking 2 centimeters around itself and just shoving every other particle away, which is getting rid of all our detail and all of our complexity and resolution here. So if you turn that off, you're going to see the detail is back, but there's actually more of it. So why is there more of the detail? And that's because of this cohesion. So this is doing the exact opposite. Each particle is looking in a 5 centimeter radius of itself. And when it's seeing another particle is with this force of 1, pulling it towards itself. So what we can do is, for example, bring that down a little bit, and that would extract even more detail to the point it starts to look kind of granular, especially if we bring up the strength here and the strength here. On both of these, you're going to start getting clumps. And if you find the correct values with this, it will start looking even like slime. As you can see there, they're really strung together there, which is cool. We have something that kind of works a little bit like fluid. You bring it down. Again, you don't want it too low, but you can get some sort of clumping here. You bring down the strength of that, and you can get it kind of looking granular, right? Just like that. So there's cool things you can do with this. But where I was using this for and where I found the most use from it is mixing both of these together, right? Actually, what's this velocity alignment? I haven't actually messed with this. So if you turn off both of those, I'm guessing this matches the speed of the particles. Okay, cool. So I haven't actually touched this before because you get used to the word velocity a lot in particles and it tends to do similar stuff. So I'm just going to like, whatever, it'll be one of those parameters that doesn't do anything, but is the cohesion still playing a part? No, it won't be. So, see, now I'm discovering things as I'm working on this. It seems as if we bring that down, we get nothing, and it looks, but we align that. Okay, cool. So you can actually kind of pull that kind of granular clumping from the velocity alignment radius as well. That's cool. That looks really cool. Oh, that's awesome. It's like snow. I was finding some sort of benefit in kind of doing a bit of both here with this. And again, be careful with that separation radius. Be really careful with it. But I was sort of, had got it to a point, and I don't want to overdo it and play with it too much, but I had sort of got it to a point when I was working on it in the pipeline that I had got it to kind of take the streaks and the detail that our turbulences are providing and just amplifying them even more. And I found some cool results within that. And when it comes to the art direction in this tutorial, I'm really going to stick with what we built first. So you can see that's kind of what I was going for more. It can, if I just drop in another one, because you can get so messed up with the values and stuff, they can be hard to kind of get yourself back, is I was using it when I was preparing for the tutorial to just kind of neaten up the edges, and it was creating a bit more patterns on the edges as well, outside of that turbulence, just kind of, you know, making everything go crazy on the edges. So if we compare that, that's with the flock, this is without, it's going to move faster without the flock. You can see it's really just getting a bit whimsical on the edges. It's getting a bit, no detail on that there at all. You play through that, you get to the edges, and it's just sort of spraying off. Higher particle count is a solution to that, but only to a certain extent. We turn on the flock, and we get much less of that on the edges. So that's kind of the main point I was trying to make, although I discovered that the velocity alignment strength can actually do cool stuff. That's the main kind of purpose I was using it for, was to tighten everything in a bit more. Put that in a group, call it flock. And the reason I'm making you do all this is just so we can kind of go back to things and lay out all these different modifiers. The next thing is just a generic force, is friction. When you're making particles a lot, you're probably going to want to leverage using friction, and this is going to create drag on the particles and make them not move so fast. So this can be a way to art direct if you did want to leverage more speed from the particle. You can then use friction to counteract that. for example. Speed back down. And the kind of case scenario here with the friction is I would use a really small amount. And again, that would stop the turbulence from going so crazy on the particles and having its way with the edges of them so much. But you're still going to get the benefits of it, right? And of course, an even better solution would just be to turn it off. And you mix that with the flock as well, but the flock already slows things down. So it can have its uses sometimes, especially because when we apply certain modifiers, like we're going to in a second, those modifiers can drastically alter the speed of the particle so aggressively that then friction can be used to pull it back, and then you get the advantages of a modifier without the disadvantages of it messing with other things. And what I mean by that is if I take off all the speed of these particles and we just leverage the turbulences. In fact, if I show you with the turbulences off and we play through this, the particles are staying still. But when I turn the turbulences on, they're now moving because the turbulence is applying a speed force to the particles. And we mix that with the particle's own axis of force, which in this case is radial, so it's spraying out. And you mix them together and that's where you get a cool result. So, like I'm trying to explain, whenever we add any kind of modifier, it's going to add its own speed based on the values you give it to the particles, and friction can be used to reel that back in. With that being said, let's go into something a little bit more crazy. So, this is only for people in 2025. They've just added this, and this is going to be the follow spline. So, drop both of these in here. And we've got the circle in there, that's cool. Change this to guide. Now this is cool. There's a lot of fun to be had with this. Really a whole lot of fun. We play through this just with our turbulences. You're going to see that it's going to attempt to follow this spline. And we can use this to get some really cool results, but right now it's too strict. So what we want to do is mix it with the turbulences. Yeah, something cool. So the first way to do that is to bring down the mix radius. When we bring down the mix radius, our turbulences, I don't know why I was saying mix radius, the mix amount. We bring down the mix amount, and turbulences are going to start having their way a bit more, but we're also going to want to bring down the effect radius. So we bring down the effect radius, and now what I want you to imagine this as is that there's a tube around each side of the circle, and as you bring down this effect radius, it's making that tube smaller and smaller. So the particles have to enter the field of that tube around the circle before they begin to become affected. And you can see now the turbulences are having their way a bit more. Now we can decrease that even more, and then we would get the first simulation, and then at the edges they're just going to start looping around the circle. And you find a happy middle point with that, and you could kind of get them interacting around the middle of the circle, just like that. And then you've got the attract strength, and this is kind of going to be the strength that they're getting pulled towards the circle by. So you bring that down, and like I mentioned before, the speed of the particles is going to be less influenced by this follow spline modifier. So then they're going to kind of move at the speed of the turbulences and the particle speed coming from the emitter more, and then get influenced later on by the effect radius of this. And that can create something a little bit like that. And then we've got follow strength. So if you turn off the follow strength, what you're going to see is it's not going to rotate around the spline. It's just going to stop. The follow strength is making it rotate around the spline. So you can find a kind of happy middle ground with that. If you yank it all the way up, you're going to get the particles really, really spinning, and you combine that with the attract strength, add some attract fall off there as well, and then increase the effect radius. You're going to get them just kind of spinning all the way up. Maybe I want to just bring these down a little bit too. You're just going to kind of get this spinning movement, right? So I would usually keep that a little bit lower. Attract strength, attract fall off, again, both a little bit lower. And I would spend a bit more of my time kind of up here with both of these. bring up that effect radius, you're going to see they're getting pulled in more. So there's some interesting things to be done in that, especially when we're working a flat plane like this, is if we move this circle back, the particles are going to move back. And when it comes to lighting, that can be interesting. You can't really see it here, but in render you would see it. Or you bring it forward, and the particles move forward. So it can be a good way just to kind of get the particles to behave a little bit. You can rotate it. This can clip some particles and they won't follow, but again, you can get a cool result there. Because then when we move around that, you know, it's kind of doing interesting stuff. Just make sure that's in the middle. So that's what I was doing to get results like this, and to get the slightly crazier ones like this as well. You keep messing with these and you keep adding things, you can get some really cool stuff going. Just bring back up the count to, I'll just do 1.3 million. And again, you'll see more detail there. You'll see a kind of similar result to the image I just showed you. But with this, I mentioned this earlier, we've got the substeps here. The reason these are important is for what I'm about to show you. These add detail, right? So it's a good way to look at it. They're adding detail. You can almost see that when I drop the substeps back to 1, it's barely even going to follow the follow spline on the parameters it's currently on. If I up this to something like 15, it will go slow, but they're going to behave even more aggressively. Now this can actually have negative effects, because you can see here it looks a bit more boring now. Somewhere in the middle is usually good. And you get kind of the best of both worlds with it. But there's a reason this is important, right? If we add the new spline emitter that they've just added, and we drop in another circle, and for example, what we're getting right now from this emitter, our basic emitter, is they're coming out from the middle of the circle, right? So they're kind of spawning anywhere in the middle of the circle and they're coming out. But what if we just want it coming from the edges? Well, we can use a spline emitter for that. And we'll just put it inside there. Doesn't do anything, but just for neatness, right? And we put the circle in there. Change this to about 500,000 particles. And we go to properties. We change this to tangential this time. And what you're going to see is the particles coming from the edges. But it looks a bit stupid, right? It's just kind of coming off random points. So on uniform, let's whack that all the way up to like 1,000 points. But you can see nothing is being affected when we play through, and that's because we dropped in a new emitter, so it spawned in a new particle group, which we don't want. We just kind of want it to use the same particle group. And then we get something similar. They're scaling in, but of course we've not changed that radius. So we're seeing them at their spawn point. We'd have to drop that to 0, and then they're going to scale in like that. And the reason, you know, besides you getting the emission from a straight circle, what's interesting about the tangential movement is if we turn off the follow spline, they're going to spin anyway. So you mix that with this, and then you can get some really cool stuff, because you don't have to rely on these parameters to get the spin. But here's the caveat, right? Is this. This is where substeps are important. If I immediately up that to 15, you're going to get rid of most of that, but it's going to be slower. And it's going to affect your forces. I found a bit of a way around this with, I have to remember which one it is, but one of these interpolations got rid of most of it. And it would be natural. So it wasn't uniform, it was natural. You bang that all the way up to about 1,000 points, and you get less of that. Because it's less of an issue to do with the emission, otherwise we would be seeing it on the basic emitter too, and it's more to do with the fact that it's emitting from points now. And it's under here emitting from a limited number of points, so particles are coming off in the same trajectory, causing you to see patterns within them. But for some reason I can't see it now. That's kind of weird. So if we drop the substeps, you can see them. So substeps do affect it. Find a middle ground. That's my main point, right? Anyway, follow spline. You can do cool stuff with it. Some cool effects. I'm not going to go too deep on that today. Maybe save it for another tutorial. You get some really cool effects like this. If we were to go for something like that, you kind of want to keep these values low. Bring up the follow strength a bit and bring up the attract strength. But then you would want to add more turbulences. So you'd want to add another one. You'd want to make it bigger, and you would want to really, really put the strength up. Not that much. Because we can't just pin these particles back, right? So you can see they are behaving, but we can pin them in even more with the effect radius and the mix. And it would just be about kind of micro tweaking these until you get something really similar. So this would be, again, that's gone a bit too neat now. You can see just by changing slight values. Something a bit more like that. You mess with it enough, you'll get the same result. Let's turn off those, turn off that emitter, go back to our first emitter, turn off that last turbulence, and we're back to what we're building this tutorial off of, which is just this cool kind of particle explosion. But let's come here to the emission, go to the range, let's make the range 90 frames. Bring this back to 90. See here, play through it, and then actually we will come back up there. They're going to release, and you get a cool little simulation like that. But they're flying way too far out, right? So we're going back to this radius by age. Let's have the particles scale in a bit quicker, and ease out more over time. So they're hitting their peak earlier on. And then fading out more. Now if we were to set up a bit of a composition here, before we go into Redshift, set this to 250 for example, 0, 0, 0, 0, using tap to cycle through those, and then we can just zoom out, get something a bit like this. And we've got a really, really cool particle effect with nothing but 4 turbulences, a radius modifier, and the emitter. But that's where the next and final part of the tutorial comes in useful, because again, like I said, imagine there's a book of particles and there's so many tricks in there that allow us to create the best possible result, right? And there's all these little tricks that just you wouldn't really think of that are going to elevate this massively, and you might think that you need the most complex setup with tons of different modifiers and you're doing the craziest thing to get the best result. But I was doing this on a job for Microsoft just using turbulences, so sometimes simple is better, and we're going to leverage that even more in Redshift, and we're going to do a couple of little other things to really make it pop and make it look spectacular. So with all that being said, we will dive into Redshift now with the setup that we've got. Okay, so for the final part, we are going to make this look really, really cool in Redshift. So let's grab Redshift, and I found Redshift a little bit buggy recently when I did do this project. I did it all in Redshift. I found Redshift, I don't know, just recently a bit slow. I'm going to give you guys some settings that I was changing in case you've been having the same issues. But of course, I've been using Redshift recently under millions of particles, which is going to make any render engine a little bit slow. So do 16 by 9 for now. Go to your advanced Redshift settings. In the system, in the memory, I was lowering this a little bit. That was helping. What were the other settings I was changing? Was it in global illumination? was brute forcing that for a little bit. There was something else. The unified sampling, bring that up to like 0.1, taking off automatic sampling, but I was finding in actual final renders that this was just better anyway. In system, I don't know, I like to use progressive a lot of the time with things. The preferences, I had to make sure there was an issue I was having where I had this on, that wasn't helping, and then actually having I've got 2 GPUs, and my display card was actually slowing it down too, and hybrid rendering was slowing it down. I was having issues even seeing the renders. I changed these things. That seemed to help a little bit. Just a little bit of a warning before we go into it in case you have the same issues. But what we're going to do is put on a Redshift object. See, here we get the particles. So we could change this to sphere instances. Now, this was the little trick I was just saying in the last part. Little things we're going to do to make this look way better. Let this load in. Right. You can see our colors are already there as well, which is cool. When we are making particles, a lot of the time people are going to think that you're going to want to use a sphere because you, in your mind, immediately think that a particle is a sphere, and you think that's going to look better. That's going to bring me to my next point, actually, and something I forgot that we need to add here. Take that off a little second. We can extract way more detail and make an image look way nicer with particles by actually using cubes. And the reason for that is I'm going to pull this off to the side, come at the camera a second. Let's make this cube 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters on every axis. You compare this, right, to a sphere. You compare this to a sphere. The sphere can often be harder to light than this because it's got edges. We add a fillet. We make this super duper small. Wrong thing. Make this super duper small like this, and then we're gonna get, the rule, bevel everything. You're gonna get much better light hitting off of it. When we're working with particles, using tiny little cubes should be the go-to over using spheres. And this is probably a bit more of an advanced trick that people new to particles, or even people who have been with particles for a little while, do not know, that I would, in 9 times out of 10, unless you need the spheres for a specific reason to do with art direction, use cubes. It is going to look better. So, that being said, use the cube. Is most of these particle systems, like Higgs particles or Cinema 4D, outside of Houdini, don't give particles rotation parameters by default because it makes the simulation time take much longer to calculate. So what I mean by that is, when the particles are moving, they're not rotating like this. You would think that, if you throw a ball, it's going to rotate based on the force that you throw it with. It's the same with these particles, except they don't, so we need to make them do it. So we're going to add in this thing called a spin. Set it to like 25 degrees. Doesn't have to be much. Come back to our camera. I am just going to drop it in our cube and press H on that so I'm not lost outside the camera. And ping that away. I don't want to see that. Now we can just play through this again. We won't be able to notice it, but you will see it in render that now particles will be spinning, and that's going to benefit us a lot, because otherwise, when we go to render this, all the cubes would just be facing the same direction. Doesn't matter if you're using spheres, but cubes look better, so we're going to add the spin, right? Put this in a null, call it particle objects, and then add 2, and then grab both of them, and add 2 more. And it's already freezing. Grab these, duplicate them, grab these, duplicate them, and then grab these and duplicate them. That should be enough for now. Grab all these, go to the Redshift tag, change it to custom objects, drag them all in there. Okay, so we've got our cubes now, right? Looks cool. The other thing I was doing as well was just APR undersampling. I was whacking that up to like 5. That was helping the response time a lot. We're going to drop in a material. We're going to select all the cubes. I'm going to right click on the material and hit apply. And then we're going to go into the material, control click on one of these dots. I'm going to grab a color data. We're going to add a color user data. So we're just going to plug that into the color, and we're going to go to presets, particles, and particle color with alpha I found actually looks a little bit better. But then there's this kind of like weird bug where it doesn't load in. So I actually found that, I mean, you can restart the render, but it takes ages. It's actually quicker just to close it, reopen it. And you can see now we have the color. Won't really mess with this too much right now. We'll add like a bit of roughness or something. And then we'll add a light, add an area light, and we will target it. So add a target, and we'll just target the particle group. And then we're going to press F2, camera's perspective, but make sure Redshift is using our Redshift camera. Now the lighting with this can really influence how it looks, as it does with any render, obviously. But just light placement helps a lot, right? So I'm going to zoom in a lot here. I don't need to be so far away from particles. It's a bit over the top. A couple of lighting setups that I did. There's like 2 lights on each side. Just kind of like that. Maybe one a little bit lower and one a little bit higher. I would just push them forward a little bit. So that was one of 2 lighting setups. But before we go any deeper on that, let's go to our color controls. Let's add some curves. Kind of like that. Let's go to our camera. Turn on tone mapping. Kind of mess with the highlights, the saturation a little bit. And see with these lights, we can just actually bring them a little bit more forward. And already we have something that just looks incredible. Looks lovely. A bit more we could do to get more of the color kind of coming out of it. I think these lights maybe are too close and too big right now as well. So we can make them a bit smaller. Just gonna increase their decrease their X size, and then bump the power a bit. But then the second light setup I did was just one light above, maybe a second one somewhere as well. But I also found this looked really good. And you make the light a little bit thinner. I found that this also looked really, really good. Kind of like that. But then you probably do need a second one. Maybe a bit farther away though. So see, I think I actually prefer that. And that looks a little bit nicer. But what we're going to do to immediately put more detail in here, right, is we've got all these cubes. So let's maybe take about half of them, just put them in a null. It doesn't matter. That Redshift object isn't reading that. This is just for us in terms of neatness. Let's take all of these and let's make them about 6 centimeters. So now what we're doing is messing with the scales, and this is another trick, is we'll add in some particles that are way bigger than the rest of them, and this is going to just explode the detail. I did this. This is something I would usually do, but create a second emitter and make those particles bigger, but we don't really have to do that in this case because we can control it all at the particle object level, you know, when we're putting it in the Redshift tag. So we can just add in different objects and make them bigger. Again, like I said earlier, it would be more important to do that if we were dealing with particle collisions, because that bigger particle is going to be colliding off particles, so it would make sense to have different particles that are that size coming off a different emitter. We're going to add in one more. We're going to make this maybe 10. I'm just going to drop that in the top here. And then we're going to change this distribution to random. Now the issue I was finding here was that it was making far too many of these big ones. I was ending up with like 100 cubes just to offset this big cube, right? Random helps with it a little bit. I didn't really find any benefit with sequential, even if I like dropped it down to the bottom or put it all the way up to the top, it didn't seem to make a difference. I don't know which order it is in sequential, whether it reads it bottom up or top down. I don't know. And then we're going to add in a second material. Put that on the big one. And let's make this super metallic. And then let's bring up the roughness. And now these are going to kind of act as like sparkly particles. Let's make sure that's in there. Yep. Change the name of it just to see. Maybe we've got to make them bigger. 15 by 15. They're there. You can see them. The resolution probably isn't helping, and with YouTube compression as well, it'll be even harder for you to see than it is for me. If I up the resolution a bit here, yeah, you can see them. So they're big enough. Let's make them 8. We'll drop the roughness a bit. But we really, what we want these for is to act as like sparkly bits. Sometimes I found that with higher roughness they look better, sometimes I found that with lower roughness they look better. But in that first material, let's mess with that as well. So let's give that some metalness and drop the roughness a little bit. And we get something a little bit more shiny. And yeah, with these, I really just want these to be like sparkly bits, you know? Cool little sparkles weaving through the particles. And they're not really showing up right now. So we could check the other lighting setup as well and see if that shows it more. Again, not massively. I would maybe up the power of these. They're just sort of there, but looking a bit grey. And when you drop the roughness too much, they just sort of fade into obscurity, into darkness. So you can bring up the IOR, drop the metalness a little bit, we could lighten the colour. Now we're seeing them. Now they're seeing them a bit more. Let's go back to that first lighting setup. Again, sorry, this part of the tutorial is a bit more kind of back and forth, change this, change that. It can be a bit like that sometimes when it comes to look deving things. I would say this is perfect. So it seems to come more from putting the color to something lighter and then still leveraging the shine without it being too rough, and we get more of those sparkles. Now what I would also do is maybe go back to some of these particles, maybe grab like 3 of them and make them smaller, so make them like 2. So now we've kind of got this range of particles that's coming from really small ones in the middle, and some slightly really bigger ones as well. And that's going to be the way to pull the most detail without having to mess with particle count or adding more or taking away. We're running on 1.3 million particles. That's really about it. I'll show you a couple more things. So I would also usually add in my LUT. You remember this from other tutorials. I would add in my LUT. I never really ever know what looks better here as well, whether apply color management before LUT or after. I think in this case it actually looks cool without it. But I have to go to the camera and bring down these highlights. I get more color that way, but I think that looks better. Another issue I ran into when I was lighting these was them going a bit too white. And you can get rid of some of this by, dropping roughness or decreasing specularity, one or the other, kind of both ends of the opposite spectrum. But I actually found the best way to get around it was just pump a bit of color into the light. It takes away a lot of that blowout. You could even go the other way in the bottom light. Add in a bit of a different color in the bottom. I don't think it's super important, but just a little bit of color takes away those white spots kind of being over the top. The last thing I did was potentially add a gradient in the back. So the way I would do that in Redshift is I would add a plane, make it big, make it cover the whole screen, and then push it back. And then I would add a Redshift materials, and I would an environment material. I'd put that on the plane. Come into the material and I would add a ramp, and I would put that into the surface, maybe make it diagonal, and maybe go from like black to purple, but it would have to be pretty dark. Yeah, maybe something like that. And we've just got a bit of color in the background. You could add some bloom. Not too much though. Mess with the color controls a bit more. Turn that off in the viewport so we don't have to see it. And that is pretty much it. A couple more things we can bring back some of the highlights maybe. Make it pop a bit more. Saturation. Go over the top. You could go lower with it. I do like having some more of those dark areas in it. But yeah, pretty much it. I would go into caching and retiming, but it wasn't really important for this. All I really did was cache it. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, should you cache it, it's going to change your scale in your viewport. If I just cache, where are we at? 43 frames. I'll cache 60. Just so you can see, I'm going to do more tutorials on these particles, and there's a lot of stuff I do want to show you with the retiming, because this is really cool that the Alembic is just integrated straight into the cache, and you can just remap it without having to do any exports and imports or messing with things. You can just get that Alembic retime straight off the bat. It's really cool. It's really useful. Not really much use for it here, but it is so much fun and makes things so cool to get really cool results when it comes to animating them. But in the one I actually rendered out for this tutorial, I didn't even do any retiming. It just, the speed of it was fine. So you can see here now when I play through this, all of that scale is gone, and you can immediately look at that and think, oh my god, you know, what's happened? Why is it doing that? But when we boot up the render, you'll see it looks the exact same. So it can be a bit weird, especially when coming to retiming it, because it can be a bit harder. But it's useful enough, and you can do some cool things with the retime. You could slow it down a whole bunch, or have it explode out really quick. I mean, you could create this same shockwave effect that I did on my X-Particles tutorial a couple of years ago with that retime, and get the exact same thing. Maybe that's something to look into, actually. So you can see there, it looks the same. No need to worry about anything. But if you added in a second one here, and had that blow up, you get the same effect from that shockwave tutorial. Then it goes slow. So technically, although I said at the beginning this isn't a shockwave tutorial, you could make a shockwave with it pretty easily, just with the retime. But that's everything for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, much more on the beginner side, but I'm going to do more with this over the next couple of weeks. We're going to experiment with it in different ways, go a bit more advanced, and try and maybe get some cool animated results and do a whole bunch of different stuff. But yeah, that retiming segment there, yeah, so you can create shockwaves with it. I hope you enjoyed this and learn to make some cool detailed particle setups really simply. You know, it doesn't have to be complicated, and Cinema's allowing us to do this now, and you can do most of this tutorial in 2024 or 2024.1, I think it was they added them. It was around May time. That'll be it. Tutorials coming every day until Christmas. Look forward to that. Non-stop onslaught of tutorials. I'm sorry I've been away for so long. I've been so busy and I've missed tutorials so much. But I'm back now and I'm coming in with a bang. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoyed this. See you in tomorrow's tutorial. My Patreon is a place where I can make tutorials that are a lot more in-depth than YouTube. Things that don't always suit the YouTube algorithm. Breaking down all the different parts of my workflow, how I light things, how I apply materials to things, and the various different parts of my workflow, looking at client work, looking at breakdowns, looking at my scenes in general, and often doing a lot of repetitive tutorials over and over to really build up that workflow so we can get good at 3D. So sign up to my Patreon today and see exactly what my true 3D workflow is all about.